What if the wisest thing you could ever say is, I don't know? Most people spend their lives pretending they have answers. But what if your real power starts the moment you stop pretending? This simple truth transformed a great philosopher, then me. And now, it's ready to transform you. I used to think wisdom meant being sure of myself, knowing what to say, having a plan. People who spoke with confidence, they seemed smart, certain, respected. Meanwhile, I kept second-guessing. Every answer I gave felt like a guess. Every opinion I shared came with hesitation. So I tried. I copied their tone, used their words, but it felt like wearing someone else's voice. And after a while, I didn't even trust my own. That's when I realized I wasn't stupid. I was just honest. I had spent years trying to sound like I had answers, but then I discovered a man who did the opposite. Socrates. He didn't speak to impress. He didn't pretend to know. He asked questions that made people uncomfortable because he knew something we often forget, that pretending to know blinds us to what's real. The more I read about him, the more I saw myself, not in his wisdom, but in his doubt. And for the first time, I didn't feel behind. I felt honest. I wasn't broken for questioning everything. I was finally beginning to understand. His name was Chaerephon, a close friend of Socrates, reckless at times but deeply loyal. One day, he traveled to the sacred temple of Apollo at Delphi, not to seek fame or fortune, but to ask a single question: is there anyone wiser than Socrates? Deep inside the temple, surrounded by incense and sacred stone, the priestess of Apollo, known as the Pythia, entered a trance. When Chaerephon asked his question, she didn't hesitate. "No one is wiser than Socrates," she said, a sentence that would confuse the man it was meant to praise. When Socrates heard the oracle's words, he didn't celebrate. He stood still, troubled. "How can I be the wisest," he asked, "when I know that I know nothing?" Either the god was wrong, or wisdom wasn't what people believed it was. Socrates didn't reject the oracle, but he couldn't accept it blindly either. So he set out to test the god's words, not with rituals, but with questions. He found a man reputed to be wise, a powerful politician, and he listened carefully before gently asking, "What do you mean by that?" The answers were confident, but shallow. The man believed he knew everything, but under scrutiny, his certainty collapsed. Socrates tried again. He spoke to poets who couldn't explain their own verses, to craftsmen who knew tools but not truth. One by one, the same pattern appeared. They all thought they were wise, but none of them questioned themselves. They had answers, but no understanding. After each conversation, Socrates wasn't growing more certain. He was growing more clear. The oracle had been right. He was the wisest, but only because he was the only one who admitted his ignorance. It wasn't about having answers. It was about knowing the limits of your mind, and that was real wisdom. Socrates didn't preach. He didn't claim divine knowledge. He simply asked. And when someone gave an answer, he asked again, then again. What seemed like a simple conversation slowly became a mirror, one that showed people how little they truly understood. This was the beginning of his method, not to defeat others, but to wake them up. Some were humbled, others got angry, but no one left unchanged. His questions didn't come from pride, they came from honesty. Socrates wasn't trying to win, he was trying to reflect. He once said, "I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think." I remember the first time I tried it, really tried it. I didn't argue. I just asked a question. not to trap someone, but to understand. And in that silence after they paused, I felt it, the power of reflection, the space where real thinking begins. That's what Socrates gave us, not answers, but room for truth to grow. Out of all his words, one line endured more than any other. I know that I know nothing. It sounds simple, almost like a joke. But for Socrates, it wasn't humility. It was a way of life, because only the person who admits they are blind begins to truly see. I read that line again and again. I know that I know nothing. At first, I resisted it. I thought, how could ignorance be wisdom? But then I saw what he meant. I wasn't failing because I lacked knowledge. I was failing because I clung to what I thought I knew. I wasn't open. I was afraid. And that fear kept me blind. It sounds noble to admit you know nothing, but in ancient Athens, that wasn't seen as wisdom. It was seen as rebellion. Socrates didn't flatter the rich. He questioned the priests. He made leaders feel exposed. And when the crowd laughed, he didn't smile. He just asked another question. In the end, they called him dangerous, not because he harmed anyone, but because he made people uncomfortable. He asked questions no one wanted to answer. And maybe that's why we avoid them too. How many meetings have you stayed quiet in, even when something felt off? How many beliefs have you held, just because it's easier? If this story has stirred something in you, a memory, a quiet doubt, or a part of you that's still asking, who am I, really? Then this is your place. Subscribe to Timeless Mind by Nikolaos. Each week we return to ancient wisdom to reflect, reset, and rise. Your questions are welcome here. Your journey has just begun. After all that hiding, I wanted something real. I stopped pretending, not all at once, but little by little. I replaced answers with curiosity. Instead of offering advice, I asked what mattered to them. Instead of defending myself, I said, I'm not sure yet. And slowly, the fear faded. Because when you stop clinging to being right, you finally start growing. The world celebrates certainty, but that's not wisdom. Real confidence isn't loud. It doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing yourself and being okay with not having all the answers. That's what Socrates taught me. Not to be right, but to be real. Socrates was never after answers. He gave us something far more dangerous and far more beautiful. The courage to say, I don't know, because in that moment, you're free. Free to learn, free to change, free to begin again. Maybe that's where your wisdom begins too, not in knowing more, but in admitting what you've avoided, the doubt, the fear, the need to pretend. Let it fall, and let the question guide you forward. If there's one thing worth holding on to, it's this. You don't need all the answers, just the courage to ask the right question and sit with it. That's where your wisdom begins.